So good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Anna Kennedy, Chief Operating Officer of KingSett Capital, and I serve on the Board of Directors of RealPAC. I'd like to welcome you to this second part of this webinar series on racism and exclusion in the workplace, focusing on the BlackNorth Initiative and the Black Opportunity Fund and how the commercial real estate industry can get involved. Thanks to all of the industry associations who've come together to bring this series to you, RealPAC, BOMA Toronto, CoreNet Global Canadian Chapter, NAOP Greater Toronto Chapter, SIOR Canada Central Chapter, Toronto CRE, and ULI Toronto. We are so fortunate to live in Canada, a diverse multicultural society that is home to people of all backgrounds. Ensuring that we include these diverse perspectives and experiences in our various workplaces will improve our industry as a whole and will benefit us all individually. It's up to each one of us to challenge our inherent biases, educate ourselves and others, and to learn from those that are willing to guide us so that we can come together and build a workplace that is representative of the diversity inherent in Canadian society. We understand that transforming the system of inequalities in our workplaces is not something that can happen overnight. At KingSett, we are committed to enabling discussions and actions that challenge the status quo to help us move towards an industry that truly embodies the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We recognize the need as an organization to not just contribute, but to champion the fight against systemic inequalities in the workplace as well as our wider communities. We are therefore very proud to sponsor this 4-part webinar series, and we are delighted to be in discussions to participate and support the Black Opportunity Fund. I'd now like to welcome Michael Brooks, CEO of RealPAC, who will lead our discussion today. Over to you, Michael.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to KingSett for making it possible to bring such important conversations to the forefront of the industry. So we've got 1 hour allocated for this webinar, focusing on the BlackNorth Initiative and the Black Opportunity Fund and how the commercial real estate industry can get involved. Really 50-ish minutes to hear from these 5 experts, and then hopefully 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. Our panel today is comprised of leaders who champion equity, diversity, and inclusion within their organizations and within the wider community. They lead from the front, and they're here to share with us their experiences in combating systemic anti-Black, anti-people of color racism in the workplace. They will describe actionable steps that they've put in place to increase diversity and ensure equity and inclusion in their organizations, challenging embedded biases, and explore the question of who really does diversity benefit. Joining us today are Isabelle Adjahi, subbing in for Dahabo Ahmed Omer, who is the Executive Director of the BlackNorth Initiative, who could not be with us today. Isabelle is the Quebec representative from the BlackNorth Initiative, coming from a super successful career as an investor relations professional. Her bio has been added to the RealPAC Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion web resource page, and Kalsi will share that bio in the chat box. And Isabelle, thanks so much for being available today and even representing La Belle Province.
Thank you.
Also with us is Sonny, the CEO of BentallGreenOak, Dennis Mitchell, the CEO and CIO of Starlight Capital, Jaqui Parchment, the CEO of Mercer Canada, and Brian Rosen, the President and CEO of Canada for Colliers International. Bios for everyone but Isabelle are in the materials, and as I've mentioned, Isabelle's we're backfilling on the chat and on the RealPAC website. A quick administrative note to our audience before we start. If you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. We've allocated up to 10 minutes, we'll see, at the end of the webinar to address your questions. So before we get to the panelists, I'd like to quickly frame today's issue. According to the 2016 census, 22.3% of the Canadian population consists of visible minorities, and 21.9% identify as immigrants. According to Stats Canada, people of color were almost a quarter, 22% of Canada's labor force in 2016, and are expected to be over a third of the labor force, 36% by 2036. Just reflect on that for a moment. 22% moving to 36% steadily over the next 15 years. In commercial real estate, we appear to be sadly behind in enacting company-level diversity and inclusiveness policies. How so? In our RealPAC 2020 compensation study, expanded to include diversity data, only 14% of over 50 commercial real estate respondents had a diversity and inclusion program in place. Only 3% of respondents had a dedicated diversity and inclusion budget. Only 4% of companies who address diversity and inclusion have used consulting services in the development of their diversity and inclusion programs. And only 23% of respondents believe that their company's diversity and inclusiveness efforts are reasonably effective. So we know we have a problem in our industry that will get bigger without change. Commercial real estate needs to change. Today, we focus on 2 initiatives to help move us collectively forward. So with that, let me go to our panelists and welcome Dennis Mitchell. Let me start with you. What can you tell us about the Black Opportunity Fund, the idea, the genesis, and its goals?
Sure.
Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. And let me start by saying thank you to KingSett for making this possible. And thank you, Michael and RealPAC, for the invitation. The Black Opportunity Fund, our goal is to raise a permanently endowed pool of capital to support the Black community, both on the community side and on the business and entrepreneurial side. And how the fund came about is that there are a number of Black leaders from across the country who have been involved in community initiatives and entrepreneurship for decades. And given everything that has happened this summer, it really created an environment where those leaders came together and said, it is time for us to give not just our money, but our time and our expertise and our networks to support the larger Black community from coast to coast. And so on June 25th, we press released the formation of the Black Opportunity Fund with 51 Black leaders from across the country. And from day one, there have been a number of overriding principles that have guided our approach to supporting the Black community. First and foremost is that we've always taken a collaborative and inclusive process, meaning we're not here with all of the answers. We're here to listen to the Black community and that way better advocate on their behalf. We're also not here to elbow out any of the existing community organizations that have been doing great work for decades. If anything, we're here to support their efforts. And we're also not here to displace financial services companies. To the contrary, what we would like to do is aid them in their support of the Black community. When we looked at other challenges in Canada, whether it be higher education, healthcare, whether it be other forms or challenges that marginalized communities face, whether it be anti-Semitism or sexism, all of those battles were fought with the aid of a permanently endowed fund. Most universities have a permanent endowment. Most hospitals have a permanent endowment. There are funds to combat cancer. There are funds to combat anti-Semitism. But the Black community does not have that permanently endowed pool of capital to support them and their efforts. And so this coming together of 51 leaders from across the country represents the diversity of the Black community in Canada. So I'm proud to say that today we've got over 250 volunteers who work on the Black Opportunity Fund on a regular basis. And they span the gamut from out east in Halifax all the way out to Vancouver. Our inclusiveness includes people of different sexual orientations, different genders, people who trace their ancestry directly to Africa, those who trace their ancestry via the Caribbean and other countries, those who were born here, those who came here as immigrants. And that really reflects the diaspora of the lived experience of Blacks in this country and is important if we're truly going to champion the Black community across this country. For the last 100 days, we've been on a listening tour, and that tour is to ensure that we understand the challenges that do face Black community organizations and Black entrepreneurs. On the community side, what we've discovered is a lot of the organizations that serve the Black community are not registered charities. And as a result, a lot of the philanthropic giving in this country is forced, it must go to registered charities. Whereas these Black organizations tend to be what we call non-qualified donees. And so they struggle to gain the capital, the consistent funding necessary for them to scale up and realize on their mission and vision. And so the Black Opportunity Fund hopes to be that strategic pool of capital that these organizations can turn to so that they can pivot towards focusing on delivering services into the community. On the entrepreneurial side, our research has indicated that your typical Black entrepreneur does not look like the entrepreneur that comes from other communities. For instance, your typical Black entrepreneur tends to be older, tends to be in an industry that financial institutions in this country typically haven't funded or financed, and as a result are not comfortable underwriting. There tends to be less friends and family capital in their business at the time they seek funding. And so they struggle to achieve, they struggle to receive adequate capital to enable them to grow their business and create the type of intergenerational wealth that spawns more entrepreneurialism within the community. And I mentioned the research that we've done. That listening tour has been a combination of one-on-one meetings, roundtables, and town halls in the areas of education, healthcare, upcoming social justice, and also business. And that's allowed us to meet with thousands of Canadians from coast to coast to get their input. And we did publish our 100-day report. It's available on our website, www.blackopportunityfund.ca. On that site, you can click the donate button and contribute to the Black Opportunity Fund. We are actively fundraising. We've received contributions from over 20 corporations and from a number of individuals. And we are actively engaging with both, well, with government, with philanthropists, and with the corporate sector in order to build up this $1.5 billion pool of capital that we hope to achieve over the next 10 years. So it's been a lot of work so far, Michael, but it's been a labor of love for myself and the other 250 people who are engaged in this initiative and this effort. And we'll continue to build up until we're successful. And when we've created more intergenerational wealth in the Black community, and when we've made a significant dent in anti-Black racism in this country.
It's a fantastic initiative, Dennis. We're also proud of you for stepping up and doing this and organizing it. And Godspeed. And I'm hoping that you get to 1.5 billion, which is a big number, as soon as possible. And I'll maybe come back to that at the very end of this session today. Let's pivot now to Isabelle. Welcome, Isabelle, again. And maybe you can speak to the BlackNorth initiative. Tell us how it works, what its goals are, signatories, how it will drive change, what metrics you will track.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to attend this event and share our view on this very important topic. So the BlackNorth initiative is an organization that was funded last June as an answer to the assassination of George Floyd. So many of you know Wes who funded the BlackNorth initiative. So Wes was really shaken when he watched the video, and this video literally changed his life. So he could see, as he explained to us, he could picture himself laying on the ground with the officer's knee on his neck. And he was so affected that he sat down and he wrote an article to the Globe and Mail that many of you have read. And the article was entitled, "When I Look in the Mirror, I See George Floyd and so do others." So after this article was published, Wes started getting calls from business people telling him, we didn't know this was happening. We had no clue what you Black people were going through. How can we help? So these people included Victor Dodig, who is CIBC CEO, Prem Wadza, who is the CEO of Fairfax Financial, and Rola Dagger, who is the global channel chief at Dell. And together, they really decided to put their head together to create a BlackNorth initiative and find a way to eliminate anti-Black systemic barriers that affect the life of Black Canadians. But to do so, they decided to really solve a social problem by using a business approach. So the program is basically twofold. On the one hand, we have asked CEOs across the country to sign a pledge. So we approach CEOs, we approach decision makers from all types of organizations. And we ask them to commit their organization to implement long-lasting change. So to that, 400 leaders across Canada, different industries, different size of companies, huge companies, smaller type of companies, non-profits, governmental type of entities, and so on. 400 of them have signed the CEO pledge, and we ask them to commit to specific goals and initiatives to fight racism. So the main one are, for example, hiring 5% of their student workforce from the Black community, or reaching 3.5% of executive and board roles by the end of 2025. This role should be held by Black people. But this is just the numerical part. And of course, it's always easy to push out to reach a number. But what we want them to do in order to get there is to implement tangible action. So, for example, to have within their organization this conversation forum, because it's only when you acknowledge an issue and discuss it that you can then start to take action. We ask them to implement training education programs, to have clear strategies, to have the discussion at the highest level. This should be an executive type of discussion that should be brought at the board level as well. So we ask them to do that. These 40 signatories, they include approximately 30% of TSX listed companies, and the total market cap of committed organization exceeds 1 trillion, which represent approximately 1/3 of the TSX total market cap. So as I was saying, we have private companies, we have small and medium businesses, we have nonprofit organizations, foundations, all size, all industries. So this is the corporate part of our activities. But in parallel, and I fully agreed with Dennis when he was mentioning, it's about everything. If we want to implement a change, if we want to implement a change that will be a long-lasting one, we need to tackle the issues affecting Black people in their day-to-day lives. So statistic, and Michael were suggesting, you mentioned a few statistics, and I think the rate have shown that inequalities are really everywhere. If we take just a few stats, diabetes among Black women in Ontario is 3 times higher than the one of white women. In Toronto only, dropout rates for Black students is twice the rate of the dropout rates for white students. If we now go to the justice system in Toronto, Black people are 20 times more likely to be shot dead by the police than white people. And these are just a few numbers. I could go on and on and on. So to address this part of the issue, the real issue, the social issues, in addition to the CEO pledge and to the conversation we are having with corporations, we have put in place 16 committees of experts, really experts in their respective areas, and they focus on specific sectors that need to evolve, such as justice, health, housing, education, economic empowerment, youth, arts, and so on. So each of these committees works with different stakeholders and partner to dismantle anti-Black systemic racism in their respective areas. And after a few months, we already have a few programs in place or about to be launched, such as a pilot professional development program to connect early professionals with established Black business leaders for mentorship. We are currently discussing finalizing the home ownership bridge program to enable lower income households to secure adequate housing for the families. And we have a few programs like that. So as part of the pledge, companies, they commit to support the BlackNorth initiative financially. So they have active participants in these programs. And we just launched a fundraising campaign. The big launch will be next year, but we started to push it, and you probably will see our ads and communication on social media. And the objective is to continue to raise money to support this initiative. So if you go on our website as well, you're gonna have a donate section where you will see all we have done, and you will find the donate button at the bottom.
Fantastic, Isabelle. The 5% hiring quota, the 3.5 by the end of 2025, it just reminds me that we probably have to do a better job in our industry of counting that too, because I'm not sure I have that number at the top of my head. But let me move on to Jaqui. Jaqui, welcome. You are a board member of the BlackNorth Initiative. You're also on the steering committee of the Black Opportunity Fund. You get the catbird seat here. You're looking into both those organizations, but you're also a Black woman CEO running a large organization. How are you managing your organization to help get Mercer to be more equitable, diverse, and inclusive? And you know what, maybe I'll just start with that. I've got a follow-up question, but let's just start with that. Things you're doing at Mercer.
Yeah, so there are so many things that we're doing at Mercer and so many things that we are advising our clients to do. I'm just going to pick one because we could talk all day. And I'm going to talk about something around the concept of belonging. You know, when we talk about diversity and advancing diversity, there's a lot of conversation, as there needs to be, on hiring, on hiring targets, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the data and you look at how people move within, how talent flows within an organization, it can be incredibly powerful. And one of the things that will affect whether your employees choose to stay with you, are able to thrive with you, is whether or not they fundamentally feel that they can bring their whole selves to work and that they can truly be who they are. And so if I look at myself as an example, when I entered the workforce as a co-op student, working my way through university, I was a new immigrant. I'd moved from Jamaica 4 years before. And I walked into an office that was really foreign to me. You know, all the talk was about hockey, and I love hockey. You know, I've lived in Canada for a long time, but there were structures in place that without realizing it were really exclusionary. So sometimes you'll hear in organizations that there's a correlation between who advances, who gets opportunities, and who plays on the sports teams of the leaders of that firm, who goes to certain types of entertainment that the leaders of that firm go to, who is available to attend networking functions that may be after work or very early in the morning at a time when certain people aren't available because they have other responsibilities. So really unpacking, you know, what may be exclusionary, what may lead people to feel like they're not belonging. That's incredibly important. And the most fundamental way to start to understand that is to ask and to truly listen to your colleagues when and if they take the time to speak with you. So I will say, as a Black person, I've had innumerable people ask me what it feels like, share my experience. After a while, it becomes difficult and tiring to do this, to speak about this. I always do, because I think it moves us forward. But if you're going to ask, I would ask that you listen and not have the conversation be about your own feelings, the Black friend that you may have, your own experiences, turning the conversation away around to making yourself comfortable. If we're going to move forward with the belonging agenda, we have to get used to being uncomfortable, and we have to get used to truly listening. So that's
Jaqui, there's some great comments there. And I'm glad we're recording this so I can listen to them later. On our pre-call, you mentioned a phrase that I hadn't heard before, the cappuccino effect, which is, you know, black on the bottom, white on the top. And immediately I got it as really a good metaphor. And it brought up the issue of how do we accelerate Black professionals into senior ranks, and in our case, our industry case, particularly within the CRE industry.
Yeah, so listen, as part of the Black Opportunity Fund, I co-led our community engagement efforts, which Dennis just spoke about. And across every sphere of Canadian life, whether it be corporate Canada or health in Canada or education in Canada, we hear from Black people that there is this effect that there are not people in position of leadership and influence who look like us. And that is a really big problem. How do you solve for that? Well, I do think that the whole conversation around belonging is an important part. But I also think it's incredibly important to start unpacking what is built into the system that prevents the advancement of people of color and actually of women. So our systems, we have to understand, were built for white men. They were. So the way you advance through those systems is reflective of what works and what works for white men. So I'll give you an example. Factually, there is a difference between how men and women and how white people and people of color look at promotion and applying for a job. So white men will tend to look from the perspective of, do I have the capability to do the job? Whereas the rest of us will look at, do I have the qualification? So if, for example, you assume that because someone puts themselves forward for a job, that makes them more qualified because they're more assertive and more confident in those things that matter to you, you will make judgments about promotion that are completely erroneous. You need to understand that the way a woman or a person of color will approach that role will be different from the way a white man does. So literally stepping back and unpacking all your HR practices, how you think about promotions, how you think about hiring, how you make those judgments. We have to start to do that. And does that sound complex and difficult? 100%. But if we want to move to a Canada that utilizes a talent of all of our people instead of a small minority, we have to do that.
Well said. And it's a great segue to Sonny. Sonny Kalsi, welcome. Sonny, I saw this headline and I must say I was so proud. I was gobsmacked that you had the temerity to do this, but I was really proud because you said, okay, we got a problem. I'm fixing it right now. So for those on the webinar, Sonny set a goal for BentallGreenOak that 66.7%, 2/3 of all incoming hires at the firm will be minorities or women. Literally set a target. And a quote that was in one of the articles I read was, if we don't meet our objectives, we're going to penalize ourselves. So Sonny, I'm really fascinated by this. Tell us more about it and why making yourself accountable was so important in doing this, and what metrics will you track?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael, and thanks everyone for including me today. And I, look, as I heard everyone else speak, a lot of what everyone was saying was really resonated with me. We've been doing a lot as a company, I'd like to believe, from a equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective for a number of years now. But I also had the same reaction when I saw George Floyd get murdered on live television that a lot of people had. And I think that, to me, it took a big step back and thought about it. Look, we're inherently in a quantitative business. I think most of what we do is quantitative, right? Dennis is going to be investing capital. There's a social purpose to it, but it's also got to do well. It's got to perform, right? I think that if we were to just say, if we all of a sudden said we threw all quantitative measures out and we just thought about life qualitatively, then we would buy a lot of nice looking office buildings that maybe don't have any yield or any kind of return targets or anything else. So look, we're in a quantitative business. And so from my perspective, if we did not set quantitative targets, then it's really hard to measure and it's really hard to hold ourselves accountable against those targets. And so that's a little bit where it came from. Now it's interesting, that article came out in the press and, I guess you can't, as much as you try, you can't control exactly how the spin goes on everything. And I would say that the two things I did say in that article that were not written were, one is that I didn't view this as very revolutionary. Michael, it sounds like you took it as revolutionary. I thought it was just math. I said it, it's just math. I think, you go through, the percentage of people that are visible minorities in Canada, Well, we know half people are women, so we know that, right? And that's just math. And then you look at what minorities are. You use the U.S. as an example as well. Minorities in the U.S. are now 40% of the population. So it's math, right? If you just say, what I want to do is I want our company to represent the broader societies in which we operate. I want us to look like that, right? Because that's what we should look like. And so to say that that's going to be what we're going to do from a new hiring perspective, to me, is not revolutionary at all. It's just fact. Now, there are a lot of challenges. One is getting a baseline, right? We have a baseline in the US, we have a baseline in Europe, we have a baseline in Asia. Ironically, Canada, which I view as a very progressive country compared to the US, although on January 20th, we're going to start coming back in the right direction. I think that, it's ironic to me, and I didn't know this until I took over the firm, that we're not able to track race data in Canada, which honestly has to change. I get I get the thesis under which it started, but I think that's got to change, because I don't think that a lot of what like Isabelle and other people want to try to do here are going to be possible unless we're able to do that. We're doing it in our own company. It's obviously we're going to have to do it voluntarily, but we're working through that to set our baseline so we know where we're starting. But, Michael, hiring is easy, right? Because we don't need a baseline for that. That's just going forward what we're going to do. The other thing I said in the article was, I did not say penalize, I said incentivize. And, so the way I think about it, look, I think the team's highly incentivized to do this anyways, because I think our team knows this will make us a better company than we already are. But I want to make sure that we are aligned. And it's back to the quantitative part of this, right? And so look, we as a corporation, as a firm, we give a lot of money to a lot of different, great organizations. And what I basically said is, if we're not hitting our own hiring targets that we are 100% in control of, we're going to give even more money to those organizations. I hope we do both, that we just keep giving them money and we hit our targets. That's my goal. And I really do believe that we're going to be able to do that. But I think accountability is critical. And I think it has to be, just like the BlackNorth initiative has some very hard targets in it that we signed up for as well. I think you have to do that, or else I think it's going to be a lot of good intention. And I'm not really sure how we're going to sit here in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and say, have we gone? We can anecdotally say we've gone in the right direction, but how are we going to actually quantitatively say we have?
On our pre-call, Sonny, you mentioned the term ARC, A-R-C, attract, retain, cultivate. So you've got this initiative to incent more people from visible minorities and women into your firm. How do you then take those people and make sure that they're progressing properly, they're find a place in your company? What's the next steps after that within BentallGreenOak?
Yeah. So I think a lot of what Jaqui was talking about is kind of hitting on what we're trying to figure out. And I'll be candid, we're not there yet. We have hired, I think I mentioned on the pre-call, we've hired Korn Ferry to help advise us on this, because I do believe, and it's got a big part of my advice to everyone out there, is get help on this. There are organizations and people out there that can help and enlist their help, because this is too important to kind of muddle around on, in my view. So my view of the attract, retain, cultivate, what we've come up with as a company is, look, I think hiring is one leg of the stool, right? It's definitely a very important leg of the stool, but the other two legs are very much, what do we do to retain, people, a diverse team, and what do we do to cultivate or help them grow and succeed and move up the organization? I had never heard the cappuccino term either. I will never forget it. And how do we turn it into a latte? I don't know what the right thing to say is, right? And so, look, on the retain part, there's a lot of things we're doing. We are getting ready to announce, for example, very progressive maternity and paternity leave policies, which I think will be leaders in the industry in terms of what we do. Why? Because I think that does a lot to help retain. Right, because I think that is definitely that is something that where the playing field is not level at all between men and women, for example. Using historical measures, I don't want to get pillared for not being a 21st century man, but certainly looking backwards. And then on the cultivate, look, I think that's why our initiative, our efforts are called, it's EDI, it's equity first, right? Because I think the playing field is not level, right? Either in terms of people's backgrounds or their psychological approach to getting a job or getting a promotion, as Jaqui mentioned. So I think it's really important that we provide tools there to help people. It's mentorship, it's internal mentorship. I think it's external mentorship. I think it's access to training. We've created a number of internal affinity groups that and I'm really proud of what they've been doing and how they've really taken off as a way to kind of give a collective group a voice, which will be louder maybe than any individuals, to try to so we as a company can respond to that. So I would say, look, it's very much work in progress, Michael. I think and I think that I look forward to getting challenged to have to report back to people, next year and as we go forward, so we can show, again, the easiest part of this, to be honest, is the hiring part. And that's why I don't view it as revolutionary. That's the easiest part. And I'm not going to take any BS from anyone when they try to tell me that there's no one to hire out there. That's such a cop out, right? We just got to work at it. We got to work harder, and we will.
Fantastic, Sonny. That's so inspiring to hear that. And you are a leader in the industry, and I hope we have a lot more follow you. Okay, 36 minutes in, Brian, we finally get to you. You're one of two white guys on this panel, and welcome. Let's talk about you and how important is it for you as a leader to be an ally, to push organizational change for all minorities in Colliers?
I like that as my new intro now for panels. Brian, white guy in the panel. I think it's critical. I mean, I think what Jaqui was talking about before is such at the root of what we're talking about. The concept of belonging, and a frame of reference. I don't have the same frame of reference and the same lived experiences, to use a term that Dennis had used, as the other members of the panel. So I can't understand, and oftentimes the bias is to frame it in your own context, or to try to frame it as why I'm great and I understand your concerns. Exactly what Jaqui was saying is, you have that conversation. It's like, no, let me tell you why I'm actually I have a lot of Black friends, and I'm a good leader and I help, and it's not about me, right? It's about the company. It's about the individual. So as an ally, I'm looking at it as all the reasons we've talked about as an equity thing, in terms of giving opportunities to people. But really, as a company perspective, I want different frames of reference, different points of view, different ways of thinking, different experiences in life in my company. I want all of that throughout there. And I want that to be, it's important for our clients, it's important for our communities, it's important to help my business grow. And if I'm just getting the same points of view on things all the time, it's a limited perspective. And in order to do that, though, you have to push change. You have to push it, because the default is to say, we've always done it this way and it's worked, therefore let's just keep doing it this way. And as Sonny said, the hiring concept, it's easy to default on, well, we're fishing in these 4 watering holes and there's nobody else out there. You have to expand yourself. You have to push. You have to fish in other watering holes. You have to go outside. You have to create the mechanisms inside too, where people want to belong. Because that's, I think, as an ally, you don't understand, so you have to ask questions, but you have to then authentically want to change. So you can't just say, well, I know that everybody in a minority community wants to be like this. Well, that's such a stupid comment, because everybody is different and there's different experiences. But you have to listen and understand, okay, well, maybe things I didn't realize were actually creating consternation. Maybe these practices we were doing where everybody's going to a sports game is not belonging. Maybe I'm thinking, well, I'm hiring all these people, but the real key is you got to get someone in the boardroom. You got to get someone sponsored through your organization. So it's listening to hear what is it that the concerns of the people have, and then actively working to change, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, no, I understand what you mean before you even say it, and I'm going to just justify whatever I'm doing to answer your question. So allies have to listen.
That's a really good point you bring up there. And Brian, I know that Colliers is a signatory to the BlackNorth initiative. Kind of a follow-on question for you. What's your game plan to get to an outcome where you feel like Colliers, and maybe get your colleagues in the brokerage industry, I mean, we're all in the same boat here, to be more diverse and inclusive? What are you thinking going forward?
Well, what I liked about BlackNorth was that it set some of those targets. And what Sonny is saying, it's math, right? You have to set some targets. So we're doing self-identification right now so that we could figure out what our population is. Otherwise, it becomes anecdotal. I know so-and-so, I know so-and-so, but we need to be able to measure it. We need to set some objective targets so that way we can put in place the changes. So I thought signing on to that pushes us forward. It makes it real. So I think that's part of it too. I think part of it we have to visibly advocate. But even more importantly is we have to just make changes. We have to do. And I think that's important. If I just keep going on panels and keep saying we're committed to this and keep signing on, that's part of the game. But I also have to do things without fanfare. You know, we have to just make some critical hires, change some policies, do the things. So it's a balance between showing people that change is not dramatic, it's demystifying it and actually making it easier to digest by just doing it, combined with actually getting people over the hump, doing unconscious bias training, things like that. So I think programs like BNI help provide a platform and help drive us towards setting some targets that we can then objectively move ourselves forward. You know, for me, it said, all right, now I gotta hire X% of my student workforce. So that's gonna force me to recruit differently. And so it holds my feet to the fire in a way that not signing it on, it becomes more risky that I'm actually going to achieve it, even if I have the best of intentions.
Terrific. I would mention I've got two choices at this juncture. One is to extend this webinar for an extra hour. Dennis called it that we've got too much to say in too little time. Maybe what I can do instead for the panelists is I'm going to call this the lightning round and ask you to kind of shorten your responses so we can have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And maybe Dennis, I'll come back to you. You mentioned in our pre-call that there are 3 pillars to understanding equity, diversity, and inclusion in your personal life and organization. Again, as part of the lightning round, can you tell us very quickly about those?
Well, sure. And beyond giving a definition for each individual word, I think we've already done that a number of times. What I would say is this: there are 3 real challenges. The first one is convincing business owners, particularly in the real estate industry, that these types of initiatives actually matter. So when you think of the real estate industry in this business, there's a lot of it is relationship driven, right? I'm the person with the relationships with the trades, the contractors, the city, the zoning, the brokers, and so forth. What is having more diversity underneath me or beside me going to do about those relationships? And I would say to that, beyond all of the fantastic research that firms like Mercer and Jacqui's company have done to demonstrate that having more gender diversity, more racial diversity results in better economic performance, I would say this: the world is changing. It's going to come to a point where when you're looking to bid on properties or where you're looking to rezone areas, that seller or that municipality is going to turn around and say, we're only interested in accepting bids or only interested in awarding zoning to companies that look like the communities that they want to do work in. And so it's going to increasingly become table stakes for businesses, including real estate, to represent the communities that they choose to do business within. So that's one thing that I would say. And then the other thing I would say is that the benefits of this type of work accrue to all of us. An example that I know Jaqui is tired of hearing me use is that, imagine a world where Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs were streamed into careers outside of technology because of the color of their skin or their gender, for that matter. I mean, all of us would be living with a much lower standard of living because we would have lost the contributions they have made to how we live now. But that happens to people of color, to women, to Indigenous people every day in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our justice system. And so by addressing some of these issues, whether it be in the Black community or the Indigenous community for women, the benefits accrue to all of us. And so that's why it's incumbent for all of us to take a stand and to make some change or to support the changes that others are trying to create in this area.
Very good, Dennis. And you kept within that lightning round limit. Thank you for that. Isabelle, back to you. You mentioned actually some stats in your first answer. And we were thinking about, this pandemic has been particularly hard on the Black community and people of color. Some data points here. The unemployment rate amongst Black, Indigenous, and people of color youth is 33%. compared to 18% for white youth. Both of those numbers are unprecedented. What's the way forward for the real estate world for a fair and equitable economic recovery that's inclusive and equitable for Black people and people of color?
And the stats you mentioned, I have so many more. We could go on and on, but for the sake of time, I will not go into more of these stats. But this is a reality, and I think that the call to action is not just for the real estate world, but to all employers as a whole and to the society as a whole. We have a role to play, and we really must start to implement change now. If we specifically talk about the commercial real estate industry, I love the comment Dennis just made, and they are, if I want to narrow it even more, they are unconscious bias in the rental process. I was reading a document in which a GTA Black entrepreneur explained, and he said, the hurdle I have to jump are unbelievable. Black people have in the past been denied loans because they don't have an history. So they're running their business through personal bank accounts. I'm pretty sure that the same applies when they want to rent an office or commercial space or to rent a business. I heard some people say, well, but now it's sold done automatically. It's artificial intelligence. But guess what? Even artificial intelligence is based on data that, in a way, it leads to the bias. We know that there are more people affected by justice system and police action when they are Black, and this goes into this type of system. So automatically, if a Black owner tries to get a loan through a nomadic system, there is a bias in the system as well. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And talking to your audience, a survey done in 2015 said that 41 Black people said that a way to support them would be by helping them expand their business and secure affordable space. This would be a beginning. So this may be a place for this industry to start, in addition to being an employer focused on implementing these measures. And I'm sure that one step at a time, there is a way to think about ways to implement the change and make a difference.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I've actually seen increasingly the term JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, to frame that additional piece as well. And Jaqui, your thoughts on that question about, given this pandemic, how do we come out of this better than we went into it in terms of opportunities for Black people and people of color? Oh, you're on mute, Jaqui. Apologies. Yeah.
That is the story of the pandemic, isn't it?
That is, it is.
So listen, it's what we've talked about before. What's been great about this conversation is I think all the panelists have come with really practical, tangible ideas to make a difference. Maybe I'll add an extra bit of impetus to do this with my HR consulting hat on. And that is when we talk to our clients, it's really clear. Certainly there are companies that are in difficulty and there are organizations that have slowed down on hiring. But for the most part, I think we're going to emerge from this pandemic with the same issue fundamentally that we went into it with, which is how do we make sure we have the right talent to move Canada forward? Okay. And I think coming out of this, one of the things that remote working is going to do is it's going to create a workforce that is more flexible, that can work from anywhere. And we know that globally, Canadian talent is really prized, right? So we as Canadians need to make sure that we have a really engaged workforce that wants to stay and work for our companies and not be working remotely from a firm, for a firm in the US or the UK or whatever, which increasingly our people are going to be able to do. So, if you don't believe that it's the right thing to do, if you don't believe that diversity actually is an economic imperative, you should believe that your workforce, particularly your millennials and below, regardless of color, really care about this. So if you want to attract, if you want to retain, if you want to, fulfill the arc, as Sonny said, better get on board.
Fantastic. All right. We're still in the lightning round. Brian, over to you. Where do we go from here? You've got, 237 commercial real estate professionals watching us today. What do you recommend to them to get us all pushing in the right direction?
I would say a couple things real quick, lightning spot style. One is for leaders of the organization, don't be afraid of leaning in. Leaning in also to things like training, unconscious bias, things that are foundational. So it's one thing people especially white males, allies, when you go through an unconscious bias training, it opens your eyes, and a lot of people haven't been through it. So the more you can do that at an organization, it will actually level set a lot of people's perceptions on things and help bring it along. I think another big thing is just start doing. Like the more we talk about wanting to do stuff, thinking about doing stuff, planning to do stuff, it doesn't get done. Start taking action, start hiring people, start implementing programs, et cetera. I think the third thing that people can do, and again, this one's more focused on leaders, the other one's focused on everyone, is incorporate it into strategy. Make it, if an important part of your strategy is to do X, this has to be part of your strategic planning process, your business cases, et cetera. It's got to be front and center, not just, again, word speak. It has to be part of your investment strategy, your plans. The final thing on the day-to-day basis is that goes back to the belonging thing. Don't just assume, don't just know people, think people want what they want. Look around, think about, are the things you're doing on a day-to-day basis, does it exclude people, or does it force people to conform to things that they wouldn't naturally necessarily want to do? And you're only going to find that out by inquiring a little bit, but actually listening. Again, going back to Jaqui, if you just hear what you want to hear to make yourself feel better, it ain't going to work. You have to actually listen and then do.
Fantastic. Sonny, over to you for the last question. Same question. Where do we go from here? What do you recommend to your peers in the business, your competitors in this business? What do you recommend to them about how we all come out of this and start pushing in the right direction?
So first of all, I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful, because as terrible as this last year has been in a lot of different ways, there's always silver linings. And, I think this conversation and a lot of what's been going on, BlackNorth initiative existing, I think are some of those silver linings, but now we got to act, right? What Brian and everyone else is saying. But I would say, look, if you're on this call and you're a leader in your firm, it's easy. Just do it, right? Just do it. Start making things happen. If you're not a leader and you're, in the middle of the organization or pretty, junior in the organization, demand change, right? I think that, I think that it is really important. And I think for companies to understand that the leadership of companies are elected by their companies and serve at the will of their employees effectively, whether they want to admit it or not. So be activists. We encourage people to be activists at BGO. So be an activist, push for change. And if you're not happy with what you're seeing and you think that the company that you are working for is not on board, think about making a change. Think about the change being taking your talent somewhere else. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, with your initiative, Sonny, I would think that you will now become a very desired place to work by a lot of people, because I'm sure there are many companies that don't have that more modern approach to things. So we're at 11:54. I've been scanning with my other eye all the questions that have come in on the chat box as you've all been talking. There's two questions here which kind of are a similar concept, and Jaqui, maybe I'll pitch this to you. And it's in real estate we kind of like proxies. We've got proxies for green. We call it LEED. We like like a nice good housekeeping label stamped on things. So this question is there a diversity supplier certification or diverse organization certification or something like that good housekeeping seal that companies could also seek?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So in the US, where I'm going to go back to the issue of data here, in the US where it is mandatory to disclose race, there are such certifications. It is more difficult now in Canada because of the story around data. As Sonny said, Many organizations are now working to have self-identification campaigns. But without that data, it's going to be hard to have something like this. I will say that just this morning, I had a meeting with a very large professional organization where we started to talk about how we could do that. But in Canada, there is this difficulty of data that we need to move forward. So more to come.
Yeah, good. And let me pitch this one to Isabelle. There's a question here. Isabelle, obviously we've heard about Sonny's firm and what they're doing at BentallGreenOak, but are there any other front-running companies? Who are the companies in Canada that we could all look to as saying, you know what, they really got a good handle on this, other than Mercer and Jaqui? Which are the companies in that leadership space that we could have a look at? Can you give us one or two names?
Well, the beautiful thing is that everybody is really studying into that, and as Brian was saying, it's about studying. And yes, there will be some mistake made. And one of the points of the BlackNorth initiative is that we are actually pushing companies to collaborate and share what has worked and what has not. And we started last week. We had the first webinar, and very successful. I think we had approximately 300 people online, and it was a very small company sharing about what they have done, the mistakes they have made. And I think that's the way to advance. Yes, and what they were saying is exactly what Sonny was saying. You need to seek the help. We are not professional. We, BlackNorth, want you together. Do we have all the expertise in-house? No. What we want you to do is to start doing things and to seek the help. So Mercer is one of them. We had Mono Shepherd on the line as well. Sonny mentioned Corn Ferry. And I think it's important not to take this lightly and try to build something out, seek the expertise and do it. And as part of the webinars, then we really want the signatories to talk one to the other. We are creating discussion groups that will be launched in January. And that's why I think people will start moving on and evolve.
That's a good point. You mentioned as well. There's one question in here about the equivalent of greenwashing in the ESG space. There are some companies who say that they're doing this and this and this, but they're really not changing. And we probably all have seen a little bit of that. Maybe we have time for one more question with 2-ish minutes to go. This is a question about mentorship, and maybe I'll pitch this to Dennis just to kind of spread the load around. It's, as a Black sales professional, I've never had a mentor who looks like me. Selling while Black is his phrase. It's interesting. How do we connect Black leaders to those in need of mentorship? Assuming that, Dennis, you and Wes Hall would have your days filled if you just did this by yourself. How do we set up a structure around this?
Yeah, so I would say there are a number of organizations like Icon Partners comes to mind, the Onyx Initiative come to mind, where, here we're talking about high school and university students. Those are programs where you can get involved. They'll pair you up with mentors and you can build your network that way. For existing professionals, what I would say is the old-fashioned way, and old-fashioned using technology through LinkedIn, is you can go out and find those people. Now, one of the things I always tell people, because I get a lot of connections on LinkedIn that come to me and say, I would love to talk to you for 15 minutes and buy you a coffee and pick your brain. And the challenge is that my path isn't available. The path that I traverse to get to where I am isn't available for people today. Similarly, Warren Buffett's path to how he got to where he is wasn't available to me 20 years ago. So I always refer people to, whoever has the job that you want, that's the person you go and talk to. And you ask them how they got it and what accreditation they needed, what experience, what tribulations. And quite honestly, if you've lived your entire life being Black, the things that they tell you that don't jive or don't match with your lived experience, you're already going to know. Right? So what I would say is you want to know what accreditation and what experience, and then you need to then tailor it to your own experience to account for things that are unique to you. And that goes for Indigenous, Black, women, LGBTQ2SA+, what have you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're out of time now. We've reached, it's been a fantastic discussion. I really wish we could go for another 30 minutes because there's so many good learnings in here. I wanted to thank our panelists, Isabelle, Sonny, Dennis, Jackie, and Brian for candidly sharing their thoughts and key takeaways and a lot of ideas for actionable steps that the commercial real estate industry can take going forward to welcome and promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in our organization. I should let you know that RealPAC, along with the entire ED&I industry group that Anna Kennedy mentioned at the start, have made a donation to the BlackNorth initiative. We've also made a donation to the Black Opportunity Fund. We understand that change takes time, and we're going to continue to engage industry leaders and other stakeholders to dismantle systemic anti-Black racism in our industry. Stay tuned for details around the next part in our series. Special thanks to Anna Kennedy and KingSett Capital for sponsoring the series. And thank you as well to our participants, 250 odd of you, for taking the time to watch the webinar. And if you have any questions or feedback, please send us an email at webinar@realpac.ca. So to everyone, happy holidays and all the very best for a safe and healthy 2021. And we look forward to seeing you all on our next EDI series webinar. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone.